So I came across something that at first I could not believe was true. Stephen King, who, Russell, you nicknamed, correct?
King of the shit libs.
Yes, Stephen King of shit libs, the man who would be king of shit
The
libs.
man who would be. It's very Kipling.
Yeah, right. Exactly. He was being interviewed by a person who he actually believed was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He was apparently punked by a comedy duo called Vovan and Lexus, who do, I guess, sort of like Ali G and Borat style hit interviews with famous figures. And he appears on camera with his Ukraine hat on, thinking he's talking to the Ukrainian president. And the name of an old Ukrainian nationalist leader who was complicit in genocide against the Jews during the Second World War. His name was invoked, and we'll see how Stephen King reacts to who he believes is Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
People who are really love Ukraine, yeah, it's not Nazis. It's Azov. Of course, they love some people like Bandera. It's our national hero. So, what do you think about Bandera? He was in the Second World War, and he fought against Soviet Union. But yeah, he had some crimes, but it's not so big crimes. It's of course accidentally were crimes against Jews, but it's really important to keep him opposed to Putin and his propaganda.
Well, yes, I mean there are always, you can always find things about people to pull them down. There's Washington and Jefferson were slave owners. That doesn't mean that they didn't do many good things for the United States of America. There are always people who have flaws. We're human. There are things that we do that are bad choices, and then there are things that we do that are great choices. So, on the whole, I think Bandera is a great man, and you're a great man, and viva Ukraine.
Wow.
The title King of Shit Libs is so appropriate because this is the quintessential lib clip. You got him sitting there like a doofus with his stupid fucking Ukraine hat, just knowing absolutely nothing of what he's talking about. Nothing. He has no idea who this Stepan Bandera is, which, I wouldn't know who he was either. That's not the point. The point is, he goes into this thinking he's talking to the Ukrainian president. They bring up the name of this Nazi collaborating war criminal, and he goes into this pseudo-intellectual sort of soliloquy about the founding fathers and how they were flawed men, and flawed men can still do good things, right? Because he has to take this roundabout way to make him sound and feel smart, because that's very important to liberals, is that they feel smart, right? So even though he has absolutely no clue who or what he is talking about, he knows the four things that he knows he's supposed to know, which is Ukraine good, Russia bad, Putin villain, Zelensky hero. That's it. He knows those four things. And then he launches into this whole, pseudo-intellectual, as I said, story about how, the founding fathers were slave owners and blah, 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 and lands on, so ultimately Bandera was a good man, and you're a good man, and viva Ukraine. As long as he lands where he's supposed to, which is the MSNBC New York Times approved opinion, then he feels very confident in what he just said, even though he knows fuck all about what he just said. And these are the libs. It's the same thing when it comes to everything. Oh, the kids in cages, this is horrible. There were kids in cages under Obama. There's kids in cages under Biden. But for that 4 years that Trump was in office, it was this crime against humanity. Again, they know nothing, absolutely nothing of what they speak except what they are supposed to believe. And this is such a perfect example of that.
Well, it reminds me of, I think it was Orwell who said that most people had minds like record players, and the power elites could just put any record they wanted on people and play it, and they would just repeat whatever they were told to believe. Stephen King, having read a lot of his work when I was a kid, I lost interest after a while. How many times can you read about somebody with some kind of an injury being trapped in a place where things trying to kill them? So he does that, uses that device quite a bit. It makes sense that he wound up being a shit lib when I look back now at his writing. His writing was very much a boomer. It was a boomer who grew up in a very white town, in a very white state. His stuff is very much the good salt of the earth people from little towns who are good, and he throws a supernatural element into it, and but it's all about these very good white people, and corruption and darkness and evil is kind of like a bizarro world version of that. That's like his vision of evil. His Salem's Lot. It's like the good kid who you fish with at the fishing hole turned into a vampire. That's his vision of evil, right?
Yeah, and that gives his writing a certain kind of charm. Right? A certain kind of sort of innocent charm to the horror genre, which is kind of
that
what
was
makes
the key to his popular success, really.
Yeah, and it
a
works.
lot of people found it relatable. He took all of these kind of horror tropes and put them in this very small town, very white American context. I think The Stand is great, but if you look at it, that is really a statement of Stephen King's understanding of the world, and it is like good white people from small towns. I mean, you almost feel like he was conscious enough of that given the biblical overtones of this, he had to make a black woman the leader of the good people, or it just would have read like Mein Kampf.
Right, in the book.
Like he had to do something like that to compensate for how white every other fucking character in that book is. Right. But then even his vision of what evil is, his vision of evil is the walking dude was supposed to have been kind of like behind the urban terrorist radicals in the 60s. They was floating around the edges of that world, right? It's a very boomer vision of evil, of what's wrong. And I mean, you saw that actually there were a lot of movies that were made around that time about the counterculture, like Alice's Restaurant, that set up this trope where all of these 60s movies always end with the people becoming disillusioned about the revolution and realizing that it really wasn't what it was cracked up to be. And King is very much of his generation. He's it makes sense that he'd be the king of the shit lips. If you actually look back and deconstruct his writing and the vision of the world that it reflects, this is very much who Stephen King would be in this moment. Going beyond that, I want to point something out, and it's too soon to say, but I think based on experience, I can say this with some confidence. I have, to say the least, a tortured relationship to my Jewish heritage, and I'm not one to really jump on the left is anti-Semitic bandwagon. Can you imagine if he did this with any other group? If he praised J.K. Rowling, he'd be canceled to like forget about some major Nazi figure responsible for genocide. If Stephen King said, I'm with J.K., they'd be screaming for his head tomorrow. What if he turned around and said, Jefferson Davis had some good ideas. You can't just go after Jefferson Davis on the Confederacy. You have to look
he did equivocate.
What if he said something like that?
Well, he did equivocate.
What if he said, I kind of like Martha Stewart. I think they were unfair to Martha Stewart. Well, I'm picking figures. I mean, Jefferson Davis is a major figure, but I'm taking these, relatively trivial to the crimes of the person he's praising. If you did this with any other group, if you did it with trans people, if you did it with Latin people, if you did it with black people, he'd be canceled tomorrow. Jews are the only people he could have said this about he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine.
Well, nobody's even bringing it up, and I think it goes beyond just that. I think it so exposes.
Well, and this is where I want to put out a message.
This is why I call them stupid, because they're stupid. They're dumb. They're ignorant, and they're dumb.
And I want to put out a message to all the woke people who tell people that when you ask them, why are you obsessed on one subject? It's very fringe. What? Well, because our rights are all interconnected. You have to understand that. If the rights of one group are threatened, the rights of all of us are threatened. That's why we need to talk about trans rights in the context of abortion rights. That's why we're all connected. But you're not going to say anything about this, are you? No, you're not going to say shit about this. So apparently our rights are not all interconnected. You just want us to go to your parade, but you don't actually believe that all of our rights are connected. And you probably have an anti-Semitic streak that you justify as being anti-Zionist, but it's actually anti-Semitism. Because I don't see any other reason that the group that, at least in the last few years, has been the target of more hate crimes than any other group. Under Donald Trump, Jews were targeted more for hate crimes than any other group. So where are you? Where are you? Where's the parade? Where's the stop the violence against Jews?
Yeah, I mean, look, he did equivocate on the founding fathers. Washington was a slave owner, but he did great things, right? But he went beyond that with this Bandera, who he had never heard of. He had no idea what he was talking about. And he says, on a whole, he was a great man.
But
right?
The person says to him, because he wants him to walk into this, obviously, and he's smart enough to set him up. He says, hey, he committed some crime, but against Jews.
Right.
You know what that means in the Holocaust context.
Right, and you said during the Second World War. Yeah, of course.
I had on my own page, I had somebody jumping on a big shit lip that I know, jump on the page and start defending the Azov battalion. And I said, okay, so I want you to imagine that there were a bunch of Klansmen fighting for Ukraine, that they were dressed in the robes with the hoods, and that was a battalion. Would you feel comfortable offering this defense right now? And what do you think the social consequences would be if you defended a battalion of Klansmen? Why is it okay with Nazis?
No, I agree with you that there is a certain leeway that people have to sort of, play fast and loose with that sort of casual anti-Semitism. Absolutely. 100%. I think in this case, though, this is more a demonstration of just the rank ignorance and stupidity of these
sure. I'm going on to how they're going to react to this, and they're not.
Well, they're not. But
there are going to be no consequences for this, but these same exact people are going to tell you that you need to get behind pulling Joe Rogan off the air. Same exact people are going to tell you that.
Exactly.
Right? But they're not going to say a word about this.
Right. And I don't think, but what I would say is I don't think that the reason Stephen King is getting a pass here is because it was a sort of anti-Semitic slight. I think he's going to get a pass here because what he said was all that matters to these people, which is Viva Ukraine. That's it. That's all that matters. You're on the right side of this Russia-Ukraine war. That's it.
That's part of it, but we're having a conversation about whether Anne Frank had white privilege. So I'm sorry. Yes, there is a strain of anti-Semitism on the left. Like, how could you even get there? And actually, in a way, I shouldn't say that. Intersectionality was bound to take you to a place where you're going to start talking about whether or not Anne Frank had relative privilege to other people, because that's where that thinking goes. That's why it belongs in a fucking garbage can.
Please clap.